hope Phil Hickerson doesn't listen to this. If this is really Stone Cold Steve Austin Show Unleashed, I'll tell you another rib that involves, because I was going to save this for my tour of the United Kingdom, because I figure if I left the United States and actually told it over there that Hickerson wouldn't find me and kill me. But I told Dennis Condrey I was telling this story places, so he let me. One of the great ribs that Dennis actually ever pulled was with his partner Phil Hickerson, and we can tell it because this is the Unleashed program and we can say these things. They were working Tennessee, and this was back in the late 70s, and you remember Tojo Yamamoto.
Oh, yeah.
The most unlikely main event babyface in the history of wrestling. He was like 5'2" and shaped and looked like Buddha, but he had been a heel in Tennessee for years and got so over that he became a babyface and was one of the biggest box office attractions and trained guys like Bobby Eaton and Jerry Jarrett. You know, after they got in the business, he was the guy that polished them. Well, Tojo was a great man and a wonderful human being, but as many people were back in those days, he was a little homophobic. And he always used to look at Phil Hickerson and Dennis Condrey sideways because Dennis had the bleach blonde long hair and Dennis had a big set of lips on the ass of his tights. They just did everything to get heat, right?
Yeah.
They could. And they would do the old heel stuff where Dennis would run on his knees away from the baby face and hug Phil.
Yeah, yeah.
And Phil would look around, and that's where we got a lot of that Midnight Express stuff. Where,
yeah,
you know,
we did it ourselves.
Yeah, Dennis would hug Bobby, I'd hug Bobby, I'd kiss him on the cheek. Everything was all playing on people's, you know, fucking various prejudices. Anyway, Dennis Condrey, unbelievably enough, because Phil trusted him, was able to convince Phil that it would be a wonderful rib, because Tojo was homophobic, if in Louisville, you remember when you came back to the locker room, you had to come downstairs, you had to turn right and go in one of those rooms. If when Tojo came back from the ring, that Phil would be down on his knees in front of Dennis, and Dennis would have his trunks down, and it would be just like that Tojo had caught Phil about to go down on Dennis Condrey, and he would validate all the things that he had thought about them because of their bleach blonde hair and the way they acted in the ring. Phil went along with this. So they've got somebody watching for when Tojo's coming. And they get the word, and Phil is down on his knees in front of Dennis, and Dennis even added to it right at the end. He said, have your mouth way open, right? You're just about to take it in. And Phil's like, okay. And so Phil's down on his knees with his mouth wide open. Dennis has his trunks down, standing in front of him. And of course, Phil is looking to the side, right? Like, so he can see Tojo's face when Tojo comes in and catches this alleged scene. And right as Tojo came around the corner, Dennis grabbed the back of Phil's head and shoved his dick all the way down his throat. And he said his tongue felt like sandpaper. And Phil came up off his knees and chased Dennis out the back of the Louisville Gardens, down the street, down Armour Place, turned right on 3rd Street, didn't speak to him for 3 or 4 days. And it remains one of the classic examples of the double reverse rib in the history of wrestling, where the person that got ribbed was actually in on the rib to rib someone else until the rib turned. And of course, Tojo didn't know what to think. He didn't know what to think about the whole thing, but it was, you know, that's the kind of...
That's one of the greatest stories I've ever heard in my life.
You know, the thing is, you had to do that shit. You were on the road every day, all the time in those days.
Yeah, I know. It gets rough on the road and you get stressed out, but shoving your dick down another man's mouth as a rib goes...